Encyclicals of Pope Pius XII. Musicae Sacrae, on sacred music. Written on the 25th day of December, 1955. Part 1, paragraphs 1 through 39. The subject of sacred music has always been very close to our heart. Hence it has seemed appropriate to us in this encyclical letter to give an orderly explanation of the topic, and also to answer somewhat more completely several questions which have been raised and discussed during the past decades. We are doing so in order that this noble and distinguished art may contribute more every day to greater splendor in the celebration of divine worship, and to the more effective nourishment of spiritual life among the faithful. At the same time, we have desired to grant what many of you, venerable brethren, have requested in our wisdom, and also what has been asked by outstanding masters of this liberal art and distinguished students of sacred music at meetings devoted to the subject. The experience of pastoral life and the advances being made in the study of this art have persuaded us that this step is timely. We hope, therefore, that what St. Pius X rightly decreed in the document, which he accurately called the legal code of sacred music, may be conformed and inculcated anew, shown in a new light, and strengthened by new proofs. We hope that the noble art of sacred music, adapted to contemporary conditions and in some way enriched, may ever more perfectly accomplish its mission. Music is among the many and great gifts of nature, with which God, in whom is the harmony of the most perfect concord and the most perfect order, has enriched men whom he has created in his image and likeness. Together with the other liberal arts, music contributes to spiritual joy and the delight of the soul. On this subject, St. Augustine has accurately written, "Music, that is the science or the sense of proper modulation, is likewise given by God's generosity to mortals having rational souls, in order to lead them to higher things." No one, therefore, will be astonished that always and everywhere, even among pagan peoples, sacred song and the art of music have been used to ornament and decorate religious ceremonies. This is proved by many documents, both ancient and new. No one will be astonished that these arts have been used especially for the worship of the true and sovereign God from the earliest of times. Miraculously preserved unharmed from the Red Sea by God's power, the people of God sang a song of victory to the Lord, and Miriam, the sister of Moses, their leader, endowed with prophetic inspiration, sang with the people while playing a tambourine. Later, when the ark of God was taken from the house of Abinadab to the city of David, the king himself and all Israel played before the Lord, on all manner of instruments made of wood, on harps and lutes, and timbrels and cornets and cymbals. King David himself established the order of the music and singing used for sacred worship. This order was restored after the people's return from exile, and was observed faithfully until the divine Redeemer's coming. St. Paul showed us clearly that sacred chant was used and held in honor from the very beginning of the church founded by the divine Redeemer, when he wrote to the Ephesians, "Be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs." He indicates that this custom of singing hymns was in force in the assemblies of Christians when he says, "When you come together, each of you has a hymn." Pliny testifies the same thing held true after apostolic times. He writes that apostates from the faith said that this was their greatest fault or error, that they were accustomed to gather before dawn on a certain day and sing a hymn to Christ as if he were God. These words of the Roman proconsul in Bithynia shows very clearly that the sound of church singing was not completely silenced even in times of persecution. Tertullian confirms this when he says that in the assemblies of the Christians, the scriptures are read, the psalms are sung, sermons are preached. There are many statements of the fathers and ecclesiastical writers testifying that after freedom and peace had been restored to the Church, the psalms and hymns of liturgical worship were in almost daily use. Moreover, new forms of sacred chant were gradually created, and new types of songs were invented. These were developed more and more by the choir schools attached to cathedrals and other important churches, especially by the School of Singers in Rome. According to tradition, our predecessor of happy memory, St. Gregory the Great, carefully collected and wisely arranged all that had been handed down by the elders, and protected the purity and integrity of sacred chant with fitting laws and regulations. From Rome, the Roman mode of singing gradually spread to other parts of the West. Not only was it enriched by new forms and modes, but a new kind of sacred singing, the religious song, frequently sung in the vernacular, was also brought into use. The choral chant began to be called Gregorian after St. Gregory, the man who revived it. It attained new beauty in almost all parts of Christian Europe after the 8th or 9th century because of its accomplishment by a new musical instrument called the organ. Little by little, beginning in the 9th century, polyphonic singing was added to this choral chant. The study and use of polyphonic singing were developed more and more during the centuries that followed, and were raised to a marvelous perfection under the guidance of magnificent composers during the 15th and 16th centuries. Since the Church has always held this polyphonic chant in the highest esteem, it willingly admitted this type of music, even in the Roman basilicas and in pontifical ceremonies, in order to increase the glory of the sacred rites. Its power and splendor were increased when the sounds of the organ and other musical instruments were joined with the voices of the singers. Thus, with the favor and under the auspices of the Church, the study of sacred music has gone a long way over the course of the centuries. In this journey, although sometimes slowly and laboriously, it has gradually progressed from the simple and ingenuous Gregorian modes to great and magnificent works of art. To these works not only the human voice, but also the organ and other musical instruments add dignity, majesty, and a prodigious richness. The progress of this musical art clearly shows how sincerely the Church has desired to render divine worship even more splendid and more pleasing to the Christian people. It likewise shows why the Church must insist that this art remain within its proper limits, and must prevent anything profane and foreign to divine worship from entering into sacred music along with genuine progress and perverting it. The sovereign pontiffs have always diligently fulfilled their obligation to be vigilant in this matter. The Council of Trent also forbids those musical works in which something lascivious or impure is mixed with organ music or singing. In addition, not to mention numerous other sovereign pontiffs, our predecessor Benedict XIV of happy memory, in an encyclical letter dated February 19, 1749, which prepared for a holy year and was outstanding for its great learning and abundance of proofs, particularly urged bishops to firmly forbid the illicit and immoderate elements which had arrogantly been inserted into sacred music. Our predecessors Leo XII, Pius VII, Gregory XVI, Pius IX, and Leo XIII followed the same line. Nevertheless, it can rightly be said that our predecessor of immortal memory, St. Pius X, made, as it were, the highest contribution to the reform and renewal of sacred music, when he restated the principles and standards handed down from the elders, and wisely brought them together as the conditions of modern times demanded. Finally, our immediate predecessor of happy memory, Pius XI, in his apostolic constitution Divini Cultus Sanctitatem, the Holiness of Divine Worship, issued December 20th, 1929. And we ourselves, in the encyclical Mediator Dei on the Sacred Liturgy, issued November 20th, 1947, have enriched and confirmed the orders of the older pontiffs. Certainly no one will be astonished that the Church is so vigilant and careful about sacred music. It is not a case of drawing up laws of aesthetics or technical rules that apply to the subject of music. It is the intention of the Church, however, to protect sacred music against anything that might lessen its dignity, since it is called upon to take part in something as important as divine worship. On this score, sacred music obeys laws and rules which are no different from those prescribed for all religious art, and indeed for art in general. Now we are aware of the fact that during recent years some artists, gravely offending against Christian piety, have dared to bring into churches works devoid of any religious inspiration, and completely at variance with the right rules of art. They try to justify this deplorable conduct by plausible-looking arguments, which they claim are based on the nature and character of art itself. They go on to say that artistic inspiration is free, and that it is wrong to impose upon it laws and standards extraneous to art, whether they are religious or moral, since such rules seriously hurt the dignity of art and place bonds and shackles on the activity of an inspired artist. Arguments of this kind raise a question which is certainly difficult and serious, and which affects all art and every artist. It is a question which is not to be answered by an appeal to the principles of art or aesthetics, but which must be decided in terms of the supreme principle of the final end, which is the inviolate and sacred rule for every man and every human act. The ordination and direction of man to his ultimate end, which is God, by absolute and necessary law based on the nature and the infinite perfection of God himself, is so solid that not even God could exempt anyone from it. This eternal and unchangeable law commands that man himself and all his actions should manifest and imitate so far as possible God's infinite perfection for the praise and glory of the Creator. Since man is born to attain this supreme end, he ought to conform himself, and through his actions direct all powers of his body and his soul, rightly ordered among themselves, and duly subjected to the end they are meant to attain, to the divine model. Art certainly must be listed among the noblest manifestations of human genius. Its purpose is to express in human works the infinite divine beauty of which it is, as it were, the reflection. Hence that outworn dictum, art for art's sake, entirely neglects the end for which every creature is made. Some people wrongly assert that art should be exempted entirely from every rule which does not spring from art itself. Thus this dictum either has no worth at all, or it is gravely offensive to God himself, the Creator and ultimate end. Since the freedom of the artist is not a blind instinct to act in accordance with his own whim, or some desire for novelty, it is in no way restricted or destroyed, but actually ennobled and perfected, when it is made subject to the divine law. Since this is true of works of art in general, it obviously applies also to religious and sacred art. Actually, religious art is even more closely bound to God in the promotion of his praise and glory, because its only purpose is to give the faithful the greatest aid in turning their minds piously to God, through the works it directs to their senses of sight and hearing. Consequently, the artist who does not profess the truths of the faith, or who strays far from God in his attitude or conduct, should never turn his hand to religious art. He lacks, as it were, that inward eye with which he might see what God's majesty and his worship demand. Nor can he hope that his works, devoid of religion as they are, will ever really breathe the piety and faith that befit God's temple and his holiness, even though they may show him to be an expert artist who is endowed with visible talent. Thus he cannot hope that his works will be worthy of admission into the sacred buildings of the Church, the guardian and arbiter of religious life. But the artist who is firm in his faith and leads a life worthy of a Christian, who is motivated by the love of God and reverently uses the powers the Creator has given him, expresses and manifests the truths he holds and the piety he possesses so skillfully, beautifully, and pleasingly, in colors and lines or sounds and harmonies, that this sacred labor of art is an act of worship and religion for him. It also effectively arouses and inspires people to profess the faith and cultivate piety. The Church has always honored and always will honor this kind of artist. It opens wide the doors of its temples to them, because what these people contribute through their art and industry is a welcome and important help to the Church in carrying out its apostolic ministry more effectively. These laws and standards for religious art apply in a stricter and holier way to sacred music, because sacred music enters more intimately into divine worship than many other liberal arts, such as architecture, painting, and sculpture. These last serve to prepare a worthy setting for the sacred ceremonies. Sacred music, however, has an important place in the actual performance of the sacred ceremonies and rites themselves. Hence the Church must take the greatest care to prevent whatever might be unbecoming to sacred worship, or anything that might distract the faithful in attendance from lifting their minds up to God, from entering into sacred music, which is the servant, as it were, of the sacred liturgy. The dignity and lofty purpose of sacred music consist in the fact that its lovely melodies and splendor beautify and embellish the voices of the priest who offers Mass and of the Christian people who praise the sovereign God. Its special power and excellence should lift up to God the minds of the faithful who are present. It should make the liturgical prayers of the Christian community more alive and fervent, so that everyone can praise and beseech the triune God more powerfully, more intently, and more effectively. The power of sacred music increases the honor given to God by the Church, in union with Christ, its head. Sacred music likewise helps to increase the fruits which the faithful, moved by the sacred harmonies, derive from the Holy Liturgy. These fruits, as daily experience and many ancient and modern literary sources show, manifest themselves in a life and conduct worthy of a Christian. St. Augustine, speaking of chants characterized by beautiful voice and most apt melody, says, "I feel that our souls are moved to the ardor of piety by the sacred words more piously and powerfully, when these words are sung than when they are not sung, and that all the affections of our soul in their variety have modes of their own in song and chant, by which they are stirred up by an indescribable and secret sympathy." It is easy to infer from what has just been said that the dignity and force of sacred music are greater the closer sacred music itself approaches to the supreme act of Christian worship, the Eucharistic sacrifice of the altar. There can be nothing more exalted or sublime than its function of accompanying with beautiful sound the voice of the priest offering up the divine victim, answering him joyfully with the people who are present, and enhancing the whole liturgical ceremony with its noble art. To this highest function of sacred music, we must add another which closely resembles it. That is its function of accompanying and beautifying other liturgical ceremonies, particularly the recitation of the divine office in choir. Thus the highest honor and praise must be given to liturgical music. We must also hold in honor that music which is not primarily a part of the sacred liturgy, but which, by its power and purpose, greatly aids religion. This music is therefore rightly called religious music. The Church has possessed such music from the beginning, and it has developed happily under the Church's auspices. As experience shows, it can exercise great and salutary force and power on the souls of the faithful, both when it is used in churches during non-liturgical services and ceremonies, or when it is used outside churches at various solemnities and celebrations. The tunes of these hymns, which are often sung in the language of the people, are memorized with almost no effort or labor. The mind grasps the words and the music. They are frequently repeated and completely understood. Hence even boys and girls learning these sacred hymns at a tender age are greatly helped by them to know, appreciate, and memorize the truths of the faith. Therefore they also serve as a sort of catechism. These religious hymns bring pure and chaste joy to young people and adults during times of recreation. They give a kind of religious grandeur to their more solemn assemblies and gatherings. They bring pious joy, sweet consolation, and spiritual progress to Christian families themselves. Hence these popular religious hymns are of great help to the Catholic apostolate, and should be carefully cultivated and promoted. Therefore, when we praised the manifold power and the apostolic effectiveness of sacred music, we spoke of something that can be a source of great joy and solace, to all who have in any way dedicated themselves to its study and practice. All who use the art they possess to compose such musical compositions, to teach them or to perform them by singing or using musical instruments, undoubtedly exercise in many ways a true and genuine apostolate. They will receive from Christ the Lord the generous rewards and honors of apostles for the work they have done so faithfully. Consequently, they should hold their work in high esteem, not only as artists and teachers of art, but also as ministers of Christ the Lord, and as his helpers in the work of the apostolate. They should likewise show in their conduct and their lives the dignity of their calling.